Houston, we have a podcast. You're listening to the premier Rockets podcast. It's H-Town Hoops, hosted by Brandon Scott and Adam Spolane. Houston, we have a
That's right. It is the H-Town Hoops podcast. Brandon Scott, Adam Spolane, and we want to send a special happy birthday shout out to our guy Austin Mendez, our producer, who was normally handling the production side of this thing. It is on us today, and so y'all will have to bear with us. I think at the very least, y'all have got our microphones, we got our audio on. Fingers crossed. Hopefully, we're not talking into just thin air or into open space. But here we are, Adam. Man, how you doing, man?
It's not going great without Austin so far. So
Yeah, no. Not a secret though that Austin is kind of keeping this thing together as a producer, as a good producer normally does. But still on these Rockets, man, we have not talked about them since the All-Star break. Obviously, they had the back-to-backs. So they had the back-to-backs against the Suns, which they won, and then the Warriors, which they lost before the All-Star break. And we're recording this going into the day before they come back against the Minnesota Timberwolves at home. The news of the day, and you were around for this, you reported on this at sportsradio610.com, and you were there to talk to the relevant parties in this, but Jabari Smith Jr. is officially going to be back or expected to be back for the Rockets, barring some type of setback or catastrophic issue that we cannot foresee. The plan as of right now, as we speak, is for Jabari Smith Jr. to return after missing 22 games with effectively a broken hand. And we also found out too later on in the day that Fred VanVleet has in fact been ruled out. I saw you mention that on social media. So just real quick, the significance of this news today, what it means for this Rockets squad to get Jabari Smith Jr. back in the lineup one way or another.
Well, they've missed him. I don't think that there's any doubt that they've missed him, and he's the type of guy. You look at just the top line numbers; they're not overly impressive. It's 12 points a game and 6.5 rebounds. It's not overly impressive, but you look at how things have changed for them since he got hurt. They were 22-11. The day that he got hurt, they were second in defense. They were 11th in defensive rebounding. They were holding teams to less than 63% from inside the restricted area. In the 22 games that he's missed, they're 12-10. They're 18th in defense. They're 25th in defensive rebounding. And opponents are shooting 70% from inside the restricted area. So, that's a pretty big difference. There's a pretty big gap. Now, that's not all because Jabari's been out, but that's the one common denominator, is that he has been out that entire time. They have not been totally healthy since the in-season tournament game in Vegas, so that's more than 2 months. And again, they won't be totally healthy for this game tomorrow, but they're getting closer. And obviously, the rebounding has taken a big hit, and that's the one thing that Ime Udoka has talked about really throughout these 22 games, is that not having Jabari has really hurt their rebounding. And he kind of went in a little bit more in depth as to why. And I thought it was interesting the way that they've had to play recently. Amen Thompson is one of their best rebounders, but earlier in the year, he was kind of playing more closer to the basket. Since, later in the year, he's been having to guard guards. And so that takes him away from the basket. That takes him away from being in position to get rebounds. Same thing with Tari Eason, who's obviously missed a lot of time during that stretch. So they missed Jabari. They missed, I was a little surprised. I asked Ime if he looked rusty at all during practice today, and he said, no, not at all. It's a credit to him, but also it just reminds you just how good he is when you see him out there just on a normal practice, because they have missed him so much.
Yeah, I think the big part, and this was in your piece on Sports Radio 16, you're just talking about it as well, what Ime kind of mentioned, it's not just that Jabari Smith has been gone, but that the replacement or, the backup plan, their contingency plan with him out, has not been like an analogous situation. So it's not like they just replaced Jabari with another guy like him or, another big or another 3-and-D kind of guy. They replaced him with essentially Amen Thompson, who has been good for them, but is a different kind of player. So it's not just that he's been gone, but they have not been able to replicate exactly what he brings to the table. Now, it's funny because the skill overlap is probably more so with Dylan Brooks, than it is with, say, Amen Thompson. But even then, You're not talking about anybody that can bring it in, from a physical standpoint or from a length, bring all of those things, right? The length, the rebounding, and the shooting. There's nobody else on the team really absent of Jabari that has brought that exact thing. So they, like you said, not only did they have to replace Jabari, but they also had other guys. The guys that they replaced him with play different roles and do different things. With him not being out there, essentially.
Yeah, and again, it's 30 games or so that they have not had their full. They've not had a full deck here for 30 games, and we can talk about the depth 1 through 14, and they've got a lot of it. But it's not like they've just been without one guy during this stretch. I mean, you're talking more than 2 months. They've been without, two of their three they've been without, two of their top seven. Sometimes they've been without three of their top seven. Like, you can only absorb that for so much time. Like, any team can survive missing a key guy for a game, a week, something like that. But when you're missing key guys for long periods of time, it takes its toll on you eventually. And an NBA schedule is unforgiving. You saw this, I think, towards the end of right before they got to the break, where they're playing a million back-to-backs. They're shorthanded. Like, there's a reason why they didn't play well during that stretch. So getting Jabari back, obviously, it's a great step for them in the right direction of getting their top guys back on the floor at the same time. They still got the one guy that they won't have, but just you just see how he rounds everything out, and you see how the rotations are just a little bit off when he's not out there. So it's a good step. It's first time in his life he's really been hurt before. You have a sprained ankle here, you might miss a week or two, but for him to have to essentially miss 7 weeks for some freak injury that happened during a shoot around, it's been tough on him. He was able to avoid surgery, which I know he said that he was a little nervous about, but they need him back, and obviously they'll get him back tomorrow.
Did you get a sense for, like, I guess the benefit of the nature of his injury is that it is one that would allow him to keep his cardio up. It's not like he, no contact, but it's not like he couldn't work out. Maybe that's the reason why he didn't look as rusty, because he's been able to keep his legs under him. Were y'all able to get a sense for what his rehab or what his time off has actually looked like?
Not really. I mean, like you said, it was a hand injury. It was a bone injury. So it's not like he wasn't able to run or do anything like that. He just wasn't really able to play basketball, and take hits on that hand for a while. But he's not going to have any restrictions tomorrow. He'll be able to play in both games of the back-to-back. So you can't just pick up right where you left off, because, I mean, you've been off for 7 weeks, and it's hard to get your timing and some of that stuff. But he should be as close to being 100%, I guess, as you could expect when you haven't played for 7 weeks.
All right, so let's move over to Fred VanVleet. I saw you had a photo of him sitting next to the athletic trainer. I know from y'all's reporting that it looked like he participated in some of the action, some of the practice that y'all were there for on Thursday, but not all of it. Then, of course, he was ruled out later on in the day. How close does it seem like Fred VanVleet is? How did he look out there at practice? Is that something where it seems like he'll be back sooner rather than later, if for lack of a better term?
I don't know. He may said he'd be a game time decision for this game, and obviously they ruled him out when the injury report came out. So clearly not quite a game time decision. I didn't see him do anything. He was off to the side with Jason Biles with his shoes off by the time that practice was opened up to the media. It doesn't seem like he's too far away, though. So I'm not sure exactly if they're thinking Utah or if they're thinking maybe he's back for the San Antonio, Milwaukee back-to-back next week. So I'm not sure. We haven't talked to Fred in a while, so it's hard to say exactly. They haven't said exactly how bad this sprain is. They just kind of said it just says sprained ankle. There's no grade 2 or anything like that. We don't have that sort of information, so I don't have a lot for you. Maybe we'll know more tomorrow. But yeah, it doesn't seem like he's too far away.
But I think, and we talk about this every time Fred comes up, and I saw a little bit of pushback in some of our reaction to our last podcast when we mentioned how important Fred VanVleet is to this team. I feel like we should double down here, or at the very least reiterate.
Push back on that.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, look,
You got
who
eyes.
doesn't
Fucking just have eyes.
in this day and age? Who doesn't push back? Like we could say water is wet, or the grass is green, or whatever, and it'd be like, but you know what? It's got a little brown in there. Like you're gonna get that, but I still feel like it's worth mentioning since he's not there, and he's not just their starting point guard, but again, they don't they don't have anybody else like that. And to me, it's not an issue of or a matter of how good Fred VanVleet is per se, or how much you like him. And he's been plenty good for them since he's been there. Don't get me wrong, but it's more so of he's like the only guy that does that job. Like it or love it, hate it, like it or love it. He's the only one that actually is able to, uh, what did Shingun call him? Their brain.
Yeah, he's the brain.
He's the brain, and how are you to function without your brain? Look, I don't mean that your brain is always working great, or that you don't ever get fried. Your brain doesn't never get fried, but your brain is still your brain, and that's what Fred VanVleet effectively is for this team.
Yeah, and I think that they would love it if somebody could emerge to step in that role and take some of the pressure off of him, but it hasn't happened yet. And there's a reason why anybody is capable on this team of getting benched except for him, because when he's not out there, they know what it looks like. And it does not look good. It did not look good last year. There have been times this season where it's looked better, but they were hoping, I think, that Reed Shepherd would be able to take some of that pressure off of him. Obviously, that hasn't happened. Amen Thompson has the ability to run point, but he's not great at it. Same thing with Jalen Green. Like they don't have the experience. They don't have the years and years and years of knowledge and experience of having run an NBA offense before, even run a college offense before. Like, don't forget, VanVleet was running high-level offenses for 4 years at Wichita State and going to Final Fours and finishing a regular season undefeated one year. Like, he's been doing this for a very long time. There's a reason why they went out and got him. And it's for this very reason. It's to run an offense and to add some maturity and some veteran leadership. And he has done just that. He is exactly what they've needed. And when he's not out there, it tends to be a struggle. They're a little bit better without him this year than they were last year. But last year, it was a disaster when he wasn't out there. This year hasn't been a disaster, but they still miss him when he's not on the floor.
Yeah, 100%. So let's go over what I guess what's happened since we've been gone. And of course, we got this back to back against Minnesota at home, and then Rockets go on the road against Utah the day after that. So before the All-Star break, last couple of games, and this is what happened since the last time we recorded, they had a game against the Suns where honestly I thought they played kind of poorly from much of the game until the very end, to the fourth quarter, where things came together and they locked down defensively, and of course they hit some really key shots, and they were able to win against the Suns. And then the next night, it's the second night of a back-to-back, and you're about to head into the All-Star break. So I think you can chalk it up, a lot of it, to that. But to me, it's never ideal to see your starters get benched. Now that could have all been about, hey, we're losing early, and we're just going to get these guys an early All-Star break. That could have very well been it. But they did end up benching Ime Udoka, that is, did end up benching the starters, going with the second unit there, the bench guys that actually got them back in the game. He never went back to the starters. But of course, the Golden State Warriors were still able to come out ahead. What stood out to you in those back-to-backs from the Rockets? Would you attribute that Warriors game to? I thought the way that they ended the Suns game, for the way that they played most of it, was actually commendable, because it wasn't, to me, an overall good game by them. Of course, they were going up against Kevin Durant. And then I was a little bit disappointed in that Warriors game, despite the circumstances, the fact that they were about to be in the All-Star break, and maybe they were tired from the night before and all of that. Like, what were your impressions of that sequence of games?
Well, let's go back even one game further to Toronto, because they could have very easily lost that game as well. They played a really good fourth quarter. So like, people were complaining about during the losing streak about how bad the fourth quarters were. Well, if not for the fourth quarters against Phoenix and against Toronto, they probably lose those two games. So yeah, it's kind of funny how though that has worked out. The Warriors game was just horseshit, like flat out. it was just an awful effort from start to finish. They brought nothing to the table in that game. The starters did for much of that game. And it wasn't, they were shorthanded, obviously. They're playing a back-to-back, but so were the Warriors. You know, the Warriors were playing a back-to-back also. And they had all their guys, and they took it to the Rockets. And it wasn't just like the second unit guys. We're talking about like Nate Williams and Jeff Green. Like we're talking about essentially the 10 through 14 guys were the guys that were the ones who were making the contributions. Aaron Holiday was a starter in that game. And so he finished it. He played okay, but really the guys that took the brunt of it that you're just really disappointed in, Şengün, Green, and Brooks. Like those are the three guys that when you're shorthanded, you need those three guys to step up. And they were benched in the first half. The end of the first half, Udoka benched them. And he brought in that Nate Williams, Landale crew, and started those guys, started those starters again in the second half. And they were awful for the first 6 minutes. And that was it. Like, to me, that's pretty disappointing. Listen, guy, they could have hit a wall. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But for those three guys in particular, when you're without VanVleet, when you're without Jabari Smith, when you're without Tari Eason, for those three guys to play that type of a game, I thought was incredibly disappointing because especially against a really good team in the West, like you needed those guys to step up and show you something. And they were they were essentially zeros in that game. And I thought that Udoka did the right thing by just leaving them out the rest of the game and letting the guys that got them back into the game, let them try and put you over the hump. Because had they gone back to those three guys and those three guys play the way that they were playing all game, I think that's just a disaster. So I thought it was just an awful effort by them. This is like your rival. This is the team that you say you hate. And that's what you bring. That's the effort that you put forth. I thought it was pretty inexcusable and really a disappointing way to go into the break.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Disappointing way to go into the break, an insult to rivalries. An insult to the concept of rivalries, because that is not how you play against a rival. And honestly, man, part of me wanted to give them the excuse of the back-to-back, to give them the excuse of perhaps senioritis, knowing that you're about to have this break and you just won your previous two after you'd been on a losing streak, but you did just win the previous two. We mentioned how they played in the fourth quarters of those previous two games. But I couldn't lean on the back-to-back excuse, Adam, because we just watched the night before them play against a Suns team that was on a second half of a back-to-back, and they gave a decent effort. Like, they probably should have won that game if not for, again, the way that the Rockets played in that fourth quarter. The Suns did not necessarily – they were shorthanded and coming off of a back-to-back, and Kevin Durant brought it like he wasn't 36 years old, though the – Ty Washingtons and Bowls and Royce O'Neals of the world played their tails off in that game. And so they, to hell with a back-to-back. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the Warriors were on the back-to-back, on the back end of the back-to-back in the next game and gave a better effort. So it's like, okay, you can only do so much excuse making when you look at your opponents playing under similar circumstances and giving a much better effort. I thought that was a really huge letdown. Well, and of course, it's just one game of the 82, but it does kind of speak to the troubling pattern of them not necessarily always playing with that effort and that sort of energy. Really, the energy is what I'm getting at. The energy that they had played with earlier on in the season. They bring it in spurts. They bring it in certain games, maybe certain moments, but it's not frenetic the way it seemed like it was earlier on in the year. And it could be because they're shorthanded. It could be because they're fatigued. But whatever it is, it's like it's not good enough. That right there in particular is not good enough.
Yeah, they have to beat teams with effort. That's what got them to where they were. Obviously, they defended at a high level, but they defended at a high level because they were playing harder than everybody else. Like, that's the sort of stuff that they have to be able to do. That is what is going to get them into the playoffs and allow them to go on a big run in the playoffs, is to play harder than their opponents. And they've gotten away from that here over the last month or so. And again, maybe it's fatigue, maybe it's just a long season, and sometimes you hit a wall over the course of a long season, but they can't afford to do that. And they've got 27 games left. They're going to have to bring it all 27 games. They've got once you get to postseason play, that's a grind. And for the most part, these guys have not been through that grind before. They're going to have to really bring it for an entire playoff series, an entire 2-week playoff series, and then maybe a second 2-week playoff series. Like you can't let up, especially with the way the West is, where all these teams are either fighting to get in the playoffs or fighting for positioning in the Western Conference, and it's very, very close. It is. There's not a whole lot of wiggle room that you had to work with. So it's an important stretch coming out of the break. They've got some back-to-backs here. The schedule is not overly tough. I think they've got one of the easier schedules left in the Western Conference. But if you don't show up, you're not going to win those games. And we've seen them play against a lot of bad teams here recently, not showing up and lost those games. Or in the case of Toronto, they probably should have lost that game.
Do we still feel like they are a top 4, top 5? So like I know where the standings are, but like based off of this last month, if we take it all in its totality, like we can take the good from earlier in the season, we can take the mixed bag that's the last, call it month to 6 weeks or so. Does it still feel like this is a Western Conference playoff contender that's hosting a playoff series, or like they might be on the back side of that? Because we've talked about this. The teams that are behind them, the teams that are chasing them, are all teams that have something, or for the most part, are teams that have proven or proven teams themselves, or have like proven superstars in ways that maybe the Rockets don't necessarily. Does it still feel like, we talked about them not necessarily being the number 2 seed that they were at some point, but does it still feel like this is an upper echelon Western Conference team?
That's hard to say. I mean, just because like I look at the West almost in like 3 tiers, and to me they're probably a third tier team. Now, tier 1 is Oklahoma City and tier 2 is Denver. I don't think they're at that tier. I don't think that they are near Oklahoma City or near Denver. But but I think that they're with that next group. They're with Memphis and the Lakers and the Clippers and Minnesota right now. So I don't see them as a team that will wind up with a top 2 seed, but I can see them getting to that 3 through 6 range. I don't know right now. I'm looking at it. They are 4 games up. They're 4 games up on Minnesota in the loss column for the 6th seed, which obviously keeps you out of the play-in. I feel relatively confident that they can hold off everybody and stay in that top 6, but they've kind of eliminated a lot of the wiggle room that they had. Like they had some breathing room 2 weeks ago, and because of the way they closed out the pre-All-Star break portion of their schedule, there really isn't a lot of room for error. So you have another bad week, and then all of a sudden you're sitting in 7th place, and now you got to deal with the play-in. So to me, I think they're probably looking at that 4 through 6 ranges where they'll finish. Maybe they can get to 3rd, but to me, I think that they're behind. They're a tier below Denver, and obviously a few tiers below Oklahoma City.
Yeah, man. I just, and that's why I think how they start off this, post All-Star break stretch is going to be really important. And I think that goes without saying. The later that you get into the season, the fewer games that you have to play, the more, important it feels like it gets. But it just seems like it's got to turn, man, between the health, which has been an issue, and not just making an excuse, just pointing it out, between the health and the way that they've played. There's just, to me, an increased urgency. I agree with you. I do still feel like they are, probably in that, 3 to 6 range, but it just goes to show the urgency that's going to be there, that has to be there. Let me ask you this though, since we're coming back with, or this episode, we start with Jabari Smith coming back after missing the 22 games. We've talked in previous shows about, you mentioned that you think that it's Dylan Brooks that makes sense to go to the bench. I've said that it would make sense to keep the starting lineup the way it is and bring Jabari off the bench if they feel like it. And they can do either one of those two things to me, your suggestion or mine. The one thing that they can't do is take Amin Thompson out of the starting lineup, and I don't anticipate that they'll do that. But to me, the question of how the rotations are impacted is a relevant one. You talked about how the rotations have been a bit wonky without Jabari Smith Jr. Who do you feel like is going to be the odd man out? I know you've mentioned Cam Whitmore on the socials and how that's been on your mind. You know, I'm a big Cam Whitmore guy, despite all of his shortcomings and flaws as a player. I am very excited whenever he gets out on the floor because something interesting is going to happen, no doubt, good or bad. But how do you see this thing shaking out? Like the rotation sort of settling once Jabari Smith is out there, and of course we could just add Fred VanVleet into the mix too, since we anticipate he'll be around at some point. Like how is all this going to go? You think?
Well, the last time they had everybody healthy was that Oklahoma City game in the in-season tournament, and Cam Whitmore was a DNP CD. And Cam Whitmore did not play. I think it was 17 of the 18 previous games before that. So that would kind of tell you that he is going to be the odd man out. And listen, Whitmore has shown some flashes over these last 2 months, but it's been wildly inconsistent. And this is a team that is trying to win at the highest level. And I don't know if they are going to be willing to, I don't want to say experiment with Cam Whitmore, but have Cam Whitmore out there when you don't know what you're going to get out of him on a day in, day out basis. So to me, it's Whitmore who probably is the odd man out when they are all healthy. And that's just the way that it was earlier in the year. And I don't think that he's done anything to play himself like above anyone. And they were playing, they tried to play 10 guys at the start of the year. Now that would, it's a little weird just because of how Steven Adams fits into this, how Reed Shepherd fits into this. They were trying to play 10 guys early in the year, and all it did was just take minutes away from Amen Thompson and Tari Eason. I don't think that's what they want to do. I think they want to make sure that they can get as many minutes for those guys as possible. Now, that's not to say that Whitmore will not have any opportunities, because as we've seen, I don't know, and I'll find this out tomorrow. I don't know if they plan on playing Eason in back-to-backs yet. Like, that's still something that we have to look out for, and they're going to be careful with VanVleet, I think, and some other guys. So there will be opportunities, but I think when everybody's healthy, it's Whitmore who's the odd man out.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it till you mentioned it, but that's got to be the way. And it's more than anything, I think it's because of what you mentioned about him not actually really playing. It's not that he's been terrible. It's just that he's been kind of, respectfully, he's just been kind of been Cam Whitmore. He's been himself, and himself is again can be a really exciting player and provides packs a punch. Can be instant offense for you, but doesn't necessarily make all the best decisions and all those sorts. Isn't a great passer, and just is kind of a very specific and singular kind of player. So, like, think about it. No matter what they do with the starting lineup, whether it's Jabari Smith coming off the bench, or if they move Dylan Brooks to the bench, or if they were crazy enough to move Amen Thompson to the bench, which I don't think they're going to do. But for any of those three guys, all three of those guys would play over. Would play significantly more minutes than him coming off the bench. No matter which one of the three of them it is to go to the bench, they would play before him and more than him. So yeah, no, it'd be great if he had ball handling and point guard and playmaking skills. That would be great for the Rockets and great for him, because that would be a role for him, right? If he could play point guard, he could be Fred VanVleet's backup since Reed Shepherd hasn't been able to fill that role. Or if Reed Shepherd could fill that role, like it would be great for them, but they just don't have that. He at this point becomes a bit of a redundant player, but less than the redundancy, if that makes sense. Like less than the players that he duplicates.
Well, here's his problem, and Udoka brought this up with me, I guess was right before the break. On days where he's not shooting it well, the rest of his game just falls apart. And you can't do that. Like, there are going to be nights where the shots don't fall. When that happens, you still have to play the other end of the floor. You still have to be focused defensively. You still have to make the right decisions on the offensive end of the floor. And it seems like with Whitmore, he only stays focused defensively, only stays focused on both ends of the floor when the shots are falling. It's funny. There are some guys that when they don't make shots, they lose their confidence and they just stop shooting. Whitmore's not like that. Whitmore always believes the shot is going to go in, but when it's not going in, he does not play the right way in the areas where you need him to play the right way. And so that makes him a guy that you just can't trust to have out there right now. Again, when he's on, he's devastating. When he is on, he can give you the offensive burst that you need. And if you're down 10, he can pull. He can make that up in a hurry. But when things aren't going well, he's a minus on the floor. He just doesn't make up for not making shots by doing other things well. And so that's what he needs to be able to do if he wants to play consistently. Like on the nights where the shots aren't falling, he needs to remain engaged with everything else.
All right, so Friday night, Rockets hosting the Minnesota Timberwolves. I believe this is going to be a nationally televised game. This is going to be an ESPN game, if I'm not mistaken.
It is 8:30.
Yeah, my goodness, we'll be there forever. I'll be there sitting next to you, Adam. I'll be there late. Thanks, national TV. Who the hell feels like they got to go at 8:30? Just 'cause, like, they're playing Minnesota for TV. Man, the hell with that, man. Give me a 7:00 start. But nobody cares about my complaints, or so I digress. What's the expectation, man? What do you feel like you're going to see from the Rockets, and what do the Rockets need to look like for them to be successful against a Minnesota team that, quite frankly, I know we mentioned they're 4 games up on them or whatever it is. Minnesota over the last 10 games or so has been a better outfit than what the Rockets have been. So what do you feel like needs to give against them on Friday night?
Well, this is really important because obviously you're 4 games up on them in the loss column, but they can win the tiebreaker too. This is Minnesota's won 2 of the first 3. They pulled those games out. They pulled that game out late here. I think it's the end of December when the Rockets fell apart at the end of the fourth quarter, and then they won that game up in Minneapolis a few weeks ago. So this is for the tiebreaker, and that could really turn out to be a big deal when everything is said and done here in April. So that's the big thing. They need to do a better job against Anthony Edwards, and they need to stay with him first of all, but then make him defend. You know what I mean? Like, wear him out a little bit. And I think that that's what they maybe have failed to do in these last couple of games where Edwards has just torched them late in the fourth quarter, which is what he did the last game in Minneapolis. Like, make him have to defend so that he gets a little tired. They've had success against Gobert. Şengün has specifically kind of pushing Rudy Gobert under the basket, but they've done a pretty good job, Minnesota has, of collapsing on him. So they're going to have to make shots. Minnesota is a team that is going to force them to have to make shots from deep. The Rockets have been pretty inconsistent with that over the course of the season. And then does Jabari Smith returning give them a jolt? Is there kind of that emotional jolt that you get from getting a guy back after he misses 22 games? So that'll be the one thing that I'm looking for, just seeing how he looks after being away for 7 weeks.
Yeah, the tiebreaker point is big, but also the Jabari Smith thing. That's the big thing that I'm looking for. Kudos to you for looking far ahead at what the implications would be of losing the tiebreaker or, Minnesota winning it. The hope, obviously, for Rockets fans is that doesn't factor in, that they win this game, win enough games going forward the rest of the season to where they remain at the very least 4 games ahead of them in the loss column, or at least, ahead of them enough to be a higher seed. But the Jabari Smith thing is big. What he told you guys that he didn't look rusty in practice. We've talked about what he means to not just the first unit, but what he means to their rotation in general, whether he's starting or coming off the bench. Just a big, you mentioned, would it be a jolt? I don't see how it couldn't be, obviously, unless he, was just terrible out there. But if he just plays like himself, doesn't have to play outside of himself or be some kind of savior. He's not necessarily that type of player. But just go out there, be Jabari Smith Jr. Go out there, be yourself, be what you've been. And to me, that would be good enough to help the Rockets tremendously. And yeah, give them that jolt that you talk about. All right, man. This is a bit of an abbreviated episode of the H-Town Hoops podcast. I did want to mention just on the news front, we cover the Rockets, but big NBA news came out about Victor Wembanyama missed the rest of the season with blood clots. Where did they say, in his shoulder? Or that, like, that's just just an odd and scary and weird injury. So not a lot of big opinions to have on something like that, other than to wish the best for somebody. even in a rivalry situation, the Spurs are a big rival to the Rockets, but Victor Wembanyama being out for the season is a big piece of news that I did want to mention here since we do cover the Rockets and is an NBA podcast. And I'll say it just as an NBA fan and a basketball fan, I am, disappointed that he won't be around for the rest of the year, but more so just like from a fan and human standpoint, rooting for that to not be an issue for him to be, for him to be good. When a dude is that tall and big and, like, it's just like, man, you're kind of an abnormal size. And so all kind of weird shit could pop up. I hope that this is like just a blip for Victor Wembanyama and we get to get him out there and have some more Wemby versus Şengün type of moments, coming out party for him this year as as an all-star defensive player of the year type of candidate. So long live the Rockets Spurs rivalry. And I'm hoping that Victor Wembanyama gets back to it at some point. But I don't know how you reacted or how you took in that news. But I was shocked to hear that. You hear about blood clots, no matter how old a guy is or how young a guy is, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. That's kind of a scary thing.
Yeah, I mean, blood clots ruined Chris Bosh's career. They've ruined the careers of others. And so you just hope it's not anything that is recurring because, let's be honest, the league needs him. The league needs Victor Wembanyama to be a presence here for the next couple of decades. Although I'm watching the Spurs right now, and of course they're beating Phoenix and Austin right now. So, the Suns are really rolling.
Yeah, the Suns are sunning, and if anybody can is built to beat a team without their generational talent or their star players, I feel like it's the Spurs are just the kind of organization that does that type of thing. All right, man. Adam Spolane here with Brandon Scott on the H-Town Hoops podcast. Hey, look, Austin Mendez, please finish up this birthday thing and get back to us soon, man, with this production, man. We sorely miss you. In the meantime, make sure that y'all are subscribed to the H-Town Hoops podcast, wherever it is that you get your podcast. You can also catch us on the Sports Radio 610 YouTube page. That is it for us in this episode. But until next time, y'all be good.